Belt and Road, right? Where you're talking about Belt and Road. I guess what you're describing are some building blocks that will create the bridge to get us to
Correct.
where you see 20 years from now. The issue is the disruption has begun. It's been going on for some time. The blue collar worker feels it before the white collar worker, but it's happening to all of us as you're describing it. And so I've heard you talk about in the past how these disruptions create the fertile ground for autocracy. And this ties back to what you were talking about in the beginning of the conversation about, do we need freedom for prosperity? So I wonder if you might talk a little bit about these dislocations. We're seeing, obviously, the rise of strong men across the globe, and some of the geopolitical dislocations that are coming from this. We might touch upon the Russian and Ukraine skirmish that it may or may not be about to happen. So maybe talk a little bit about how you see the difficulties that might arise as we create this bridge forward.
Yeah, what we're basically describing now is a Maslowian disappointment, that people are disappointed. Not necessarily they're worse off, they're just disappointed. They're disappointed that their children are not going to have the same future as they had in the past. Or they might be disappointed that they're not adding as much value as they were hoping to add when they were younger. Or they're disappointed that their career path doesn't look anything like what they expected their career path to be. And so whenever you have Maslowian disappointment, people reach out to extremes. The same happened before, whether it was Stalin. Well, Stalin was a bit different, whether it was, Hitler or Mussolini. One has to remember that US came very, very close to that in 1930s as well. And so they always reach out to those extreme answers, because people, generally speaking, don't really care as much about democracy or non-democracy. I mean, some people do, but most people don't. But what they do care about is that they want to feel good. They want to feel that somebody is actually acting on their behalf. And populists are very good at convincing people that I have identified the enemy and I understand your pain and what you go through, and I will be working for you. And it's amazing through the ages how many times people actually are convinced that that is the right answer. And so extreme left and extreme right are actually not that much different. They both amplify the state. I think Hayek was quite correctly highlighting that there is no difference that much between fascism and communism. Both of them are magnifying state. Both are big for the bigness sake. They both do the same thing.
Totalitarian at the extremes. It's the horseshoe theory, right? They're both
Yes,
totalitarian at the extremes and heavy government.
correct. There are some differences. For example, extreme right tends to be xenophobic. They tend to be exclusive. They tend to be us or them. They tend to be localized. They also tend to have sort of moral preconditions, whether it's religious preconditions or abortion, procreation rights. Extreme left, on the other hand, tends to be more international. They tend to be less xenophobic. They tend to be more inclusive. They don't tend to, they want to reshape a human being rather than determining what your private matters really ought to be. And so there are differences. But the key that links them together is that the answer is the state. The state has got the solutions for you. And that's why a lot of policies that Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders were propagating were not dissimilar of what Donald Trump actually wanted to do as well. And so the question becomes, is it the right answer that the state is the answer? Because China genuinely believes that to be the case. As we said, in the last 500 years, that was the wrong answer. But one of the things I describe in my book is that Nikolai Bukharin started Gosplan, which became a planning agency of Russia. He also started new economic policy in Russia in 1920s, which basically tried to combine elements of private sector and public sector, but with a public sector dominance and direction. Now, it did not work. And he got shot, of course. But the thing is, the same sort of thing was tried by Allende in Chile. The same sort of thing was tried by many others, by Mao. All of them failed. So one of the things the book asks is a socialist calculation debate that was raging in 1930s, 40s, and 50s, which basically argued that central allocation of capital could be more efficient than Adam Smith's invisible hand. Is this debate over? Because it has been over since 50s, but is it over? Or are people like Buhari and Allende, for example, were just ahead of their time? They did not have the computational means in order to allocate the capital, something that Xi Jinping has today in a much better stance than Buhari, who used to have those little files. He was counting, nails in galoshes and stuff like that, trying to determine what are the right prices and the right supply. So that could be one area that you could argue that maybe we are now in a position that central allocation of capital could be better. And after all, private sector can stuff up things very badly and can misallocate capital incredibly badly as well. The other area is inventiveness. And if you think of inventiveness, in the past, the answer is that if you don't exchange views, if you don't exchange opinions, if you don't build on the shoulders of others, you're finished. But now, increasingly, artificial intelligence picks up a lot of this. It doesn't have or require the same degree of freedom. Neither does it require the same degree of information interchange what the previous generations required. So can you actually have inventiveness? Because think of China, the greatest innovator of the last 50 or 60 years, but very poor inventor, invented almost nothing, literally almost nothing. And that is why Donald Trump was so successful in his campaign against Huawei, because China still draws on intellectual capital of the West. Without it, nothing functions. So can China become inventive in a society of unappealable authority, in a society that doesn't have the same degree of freedom that normally you would associate? The answer, maybe they can, because as I said, as human input becomes less, maybe you can do it. And so that becomes the essence to say, if we can actually allocate capital differently, if we can invent differently, maybe the degree of freedom that we require might be less.